Hello and welcome back to Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield, our Global Director and Business Line Leader for our Medical and Laboratory Business at Intertech. And today I am so thrilled to be joined by Samantha Doshi. Hi, Sam. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for having me.
Yes, so happy to have you on the podcast today. And as I always do when we have our subject matter experts on, I would love for you to give just a brief introduction to yourself, how long you've been at Intertech, and what you do here within the organization.
Of course. So my name is Samantha Doshi. I'm engineering manager out of our Lake Forest location. I've been with Intertech for over 5 years, but I've been in the TIC industry since 2010. My specialty is in renewable energies, and the teams that I currently oversee are PD, EMC, and medical devices.
Yes, and our favorite topic on this podcast, of course, is medical devices, and that's what we're going to be digging into today. So as you mentioned, you sit in Lake Forest, right? One of our large medical facilities in the state of California. Obviously, there's tons of medical device development that goes on within the state. And, we're seeing this big trend towards more compact devices, smaller devices. And a lot of this is leading towards this kind of increased need for IP testing. So people will throw around the phrase ingress protection. They'll talk about IP testing, but maybe for everyone out there who's not as familiar with what we mean when we talk about IP testing or when we say ingress protection, maybe you can just give a brief overview so everyone is kind of on the same page when we go forward with some of the questions into the technical specifics.
Absolutely. So IP testing, it's all about evaluating how well a device is sealed against solids and liquids. So IP stands for ingress protection, and it's a standardized way of determining whether dust, water, or foreign materials can get inside a device and potentially affect operation or safety. So like for medical devices, it's particularly crucial, whether it's a handheld diagnostics tool in a hospital or a wearable insulin pump. You don't want dust, water, or bodily fluids seeping in where they shouldn't be. So that's what IP testing tests for.
Yeah, and I think, you noted it well, right? It's so important for medical devices when we think about this very broad brush term when we talk medical devices. That can mean anything, right? From veterinary equipment, it can be home use devices, devices that are portable, more consumer type devices, all the way through to something that's sitting next to a hospital bed that of course has to be, wary of liquids being spilled on it or an IV bag being punctured, right? There's just so many things that come into play because now when you're thinking about the medical device, you're thinking about the environment in which it's going into, right? And how do you control any of these foreign substances from the outside coming in? And how do you make sure that you're testing and, keeping all of the internal workings of a device safe? So that way, of course, if it's delivering something that's life-saving or preventative, right, it does exactly what it's supposed to be doing.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself.
So when we think about it too, I think, there's a little bit of confusion, right? When we talk to manufacturers and when they think about the different numbers, right? Because there is a 2-number system, right? So you'll hear IPX9 or IP2X, right? So you have those kind of 2 numbers, the different rating scale. So can you go into a little bit of what the first number means, what the second number means, what the difference is? What if someone has both numbers and IP19? What does that mean for someone when they see that kind of on a label that's affixed to a device that gives an IP rating?
Great question. So IP rating, it does consist of 2 numbers. So the first number is a 0 to a 6. It represents protection against solid particles like dust and debris. That's the most common way to think of it. But it isn't just about dust and debris. It also includes protection from accidental contact. So lower levels like IPX1X or IP4X involve test probes, including a standard finger probe. And that's really to ensure users can't accidentally touch something that's hazardous. For medical devices, especially home healthcare equipment, it's really critical because it includes a child's finger probe to assess safety in environments where children might be present. So that's the first one. Second one represents protection against liquids, and that's a 0 to 9K rating. So that's really including water sprays, immersions, and in the worst case scenario, high pressure cleaning. So for example, IPX67, that represents a device that's completely dust tight. That's the 6th part, but it can withstand immersions of water up to 1 meter, and that's the 7 part. A more relevant example for medical devices would be like an IPX4 device. So it might not be dust rated, but it could handle splashes from any direction. So, of course, understanding these numbers is going to be really key for manufacturers when designing their devices for real world conditions.
Yeah, and you think, I mean, you hit on it perfectly right, that home healthcare with the little tiny finger pro, right, for a child, or you use the examples too, right, when it goes into a home and it's a device that's sitting next to like a litter box, or you have animals, right, and there's fur and there's dust and there's all of these things, right? You have to be thinking about that with the environment in which the product is used, right? So it's so important. And then, when you look on the liquid side, right, again, all about the environment, how it's intended to be used, as well as, is there misuse that's foreseeable, right? And what could happen. So
yeah, absolutely.
With that too, oftentimes, right, people want to be able to point to the standard. So can you just remind everybody of what the standard is that we follow when we're doing IP testing?
Yeah, so the go-to standard for ingress protection testing is IEC 60529. This is a global benchmark for defining IP ratings, and it's the reference standard that's, of course, in the one we're familiar with in the medical world, which is IEC 60601-1. However, depending on the type of device that you have, you might also need to consider standards like ISO 14708, and that's for active implantable medical devices. And of course, it's really hard to tell what standard is going to be applicable. So it's always best to align your IP testing with your overall regulatory strategy for the device.
Yeah, absolutely. And when someone refers to the standard, right, you'll see the tables so you understand the rating system, right? And so that kind of gets you started on the right path when you're trying to determine, right, what should my IP rating be, right? How do I determine what my IP rating is? Do I need to have an IP rating? Of course, it has to go on the label if you have one. So you have to kind of go through that process of reviewing the standard and then say, okay, what is our IP rating going to be? And I think I just have to plug it right now too, because we're deep in talks about the new version of 60601, the fourth edition, and they've been talking a lot about IP ratings and if they want to have a mandated IP rating coming up in the next version of the standard, right? So there's a lot of discussion around this because it is so important and so critical, not just if you want to put it on your label, but it's just for the safety of the device. So when we're thinking of that, right, we talk about the standard, the 60529, you have the tables in there. Are there specific considerations or how should someone determine, right, what is my IP rating? I mean, do I go for like the worst case possible? Do I go for the, path of least resistance? Like, where do I come kind of in the middle to make sure that I'm getting an IP rating that is suitable for my product?
The way to really look at that is, of course, the environmental conditions your device could be experiencing. It's really diverse. So, for instance, we talked a little bit about it before. That's the exposure to disinfectants and cleaning procedures. Many devices wipe down multiple times a day with really harsh chemicals. Sterilization. Let's talk about UV sterilization. That can stress your seals, your enclosures. If we're talking about devices worn close to the body, that's humidity, that's bodily fluids. These affect things like glucose monitors. And then maybe something not typically considered are like transportation conditions. So medical devices are often shipped globally. They might experience extreme temperatures, vibration, pressure changes, you name it. So a manufacturer really needs to consider all of these to ensure that their device holds up in the real world and not just in the test lab.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. And then I think you hit on a couple of them, but we always have to think about examples of like, well, what happens if this goes wrong, right? As you say, right? If your seals are being weakened over time, well, what happens if the dust and particles and particulates get into the system, right? What does that do, right? What does that affect? Same thing with water or liquids, right? What happens if your device is sitting under an IV bag and then now liquid has, gotten in through your enclosure? What happens, right? What does that mean? So are there any other like potential, safety risks or device failures or things that you think of when you think about, okay, why this is so important? And if you have an inadequate IP rating, like if you do something, maybe you only do it for a spray, but really there's a likelihood that it would have, much more liquid spilled on it, right? I mean, are there examples that you can think of where maybe an inadequate rating could cause some sort of, major malfunction or issue?
Well, I think that's really into like challenges when really determining environmental conditions, and it could be safety factor. So one that's I think commonly missed. Let's take the example of like a waterproof piece of equipment. One lesser known risk is alarm audibility. So like say fully sealed enclosures, that can limit sound output. So obviously that could impact effectiveness of critical alarms. And hospitals, auditory alarms are a key safety feature.
Absolutely.
Manufacturers, they got to consider this balance of ingress protection and acoustic performance. And then, of course, I mean, we're just going to go into real world conditions just because a device passes IPX7. So that's water immersion. That's that 1 meter water immersion. Doesn't mean it can withstand high pressure hospital cleanings. So you have to consider how it's going to be used, how it's going to be cleaned, how it's going to be maintained. Yeah, those are things to really consider. And of course, a big challenge to that is going to be cost, right?
Yeah.
If you're going for a higher protection, if you're aiming for that higher protection of IP, that could be more complex enclosures, which can impact manufacturing and material costs.
Yeah, and I think, you touched on it really well about in a professional environment, what this looks like. But then again, we see this big shift towards these types of devices being used in the home that are kind of more along the lines of a consumer or home healthcare product, right? Something that's smaller, more compact, that's like easily dropped maybe into a bathtub or into a sink, right? I mean, you think, we have this hospital environment that's very controlled and, you have specific users, but now you start entering into the home and it's like, is someone cleaning it, disinfecting it, sterilizing it in the way that it's described in the manual that they're supposed to? Are they running it under the water thinking, oh, this should be fine, right? You have to think about all of these things now when you introduce a different subset of the population or different users that are now interacting with the device, right? When you think about something that's more consumer focused versus a professional use environment.
Yeah. So let's be real. Medical devices, they require a higher level of repeatability and reliability. And that's more typical than any kind of consumer electronic. So, okay, yeah, like you said, take smartphone. Maybe someone cleans it once in a while, hopefully a little bit more than that if they're using it so often. But a medical device, I mean, that thing could be used multiple patients, cleaned really aggressively. So you do have to consider that, and you have to consider the really strict regulatory approvals that's required of medical devices, like the FDA. So really, IP testing is really in large for medical devices, part of a broader safety and risk management strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk us through too, just so everyone is aware of how we actually perform the testing, right, in actuality? So talking through dust and particulates and things like that, what does that test protocol actually look like? And the same as with the different levels for water. I mean, is this a how do we do the different test setups? How do we run them? Like, what does that look like if I say, okay, I've downloaded the standard, I've gone through this process, I know I need an IP rating, we've done our risk analysis, we've determined that this is our IP rating based on our environment, based on our use conditions. Now we're ready to come, we're bringing you the device, we say, okay, we're ready for you to do this testing, or maybe we want to demo it on our own if we can, right? What does that look like on both sides, the first portion and then the second portion?
Okay, so first portion, you're bringing the device to Intertech. What we're going to do is first an inspection of the product, making sure everything is as sealed as possible. Then we might start off with some dust testing, which is a little bit less common than water testing, but we'll start there. So for instance, let's say the device claims dust resistance. So we're going to place it in a sealed dust chamber and expose it to this really fine talc-like powder under pressure for a set amount of time. And it's circulating these dust particles around the device as pressurized. After this test is done, we're going to pull it out. We're going to dust it off. And then we're going to check for internal contamination. That's really what the whole purpose of this test is. Did any of that really fine talc powder get into the device and could affect things like creepage and clearance, which is an electrical safety risk. And then the more fun one, in my opinion, is going to be the water ingress testing. And there's multiple levels of it. So most common for medical devices is going to be IPX1 and IPX4. And these are your drips and sprays. So you'll bring the device into the test lab. Let's say it'll be placed under a uniform dripper. It could be either at a tilt, it could be rotating under the drip array. Or for IPX5 through 8, that one's a little bit more fun. These are jet and immersion tests. So devices are subjected to water jets or submerged under different depths and durations. And then last but not least, which is pretty uncommon but very exciting, is a high pressure wash, and that's IPX9K. And that's for really extreme cleaning resistance type products. And the most important part for any of these types of water ingress testing, we're looking for the same thing we are for dust. We're inspecting for leakage, functionality issues, and any potential safety risks.
Yeah. So what if, as you say, it is really fun to see this, but of course we have to always be aware that then there's risks of damage to the product, right? If you suddenly start submerging it in water, submerging it at depth, right? Spraying it high power, right? There is potential for damage to the product or damage to the device if you can't pass, right? So if I'm a manufacturer and I want to bring my product in, is it better to start lower and work my way up? Do I just come and see, okay, this is what we want to try to go for, and if we can't make it, then therefore we can work our way down? What types of different strategies do we see people employing when they're trying to do the actual performance side of the testing itself?
My first suggestion, of course, is look at what your product is going to be experiencing in real life, and then try to estimate what IP level that would really be testing for. It's not a bad strategy to go lower to higher. It's really, if you're in kind of like the design and prototyping phase where you're trying to figure it out and you have the ability to make design changes like enclosure, seals changes, that's a great way to really test the limits of your device. And you can have free range to kind of attest to failure.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, right? People don't just come to us with a final device saying, this is our IP rating, we need you to test for it so we can put our label on it, right? There is that idea that you can come in early, you can do this performance type testing, you can figure it out, you can work with us, we can have these discussions, because I think sometimes people look at the standard, they look at the tables, they say, okay, I have to make this decision, or I have to know what it's going to look like. And then, maybe that's not the case. As you say, you don't have to go more rigorous just for the sake of it, right? You really do want to think about, in actuality, what the use case is going to be and make sure that you're meeting the actual requirements for that. So coming in, doing performance testing, working with us on it to make sure that you're getting that IP rating that you need before you get your labels all printed up is probably the best strategy, right? When someone's doing their kind of early design and development.
Yeah. And you don't have to just use it for early design and development too. Of course, you could use IP ratings for manufacturing quality control. So periodic batch testing ensures your product consistency. Anytime you have supply chain issues, you need to make changes to your materials and enclosures, your designs, a manufacturing process, that's probably going to trigger use of IP testing. And you could also use it for post-market surveillance. So if you're getting field failures, complaints related to IP, that really can help identify some issues for you.
Yeah, that's such a good thing to note. And I think you really hit on it in there too, right? If you're making a change, you can't assume that your IP rating and your IP label is going to be relevant then. So if you're changing, even if you're saying, oh, it's the same enclosure, it's just a different material, or we're just sourcing a different vendor, or whatever changes you might be making, you really need to think about the impact that might have on the actual IP rating, and likely would have to redo testing. You can't just assume that because it was fine when we did our original testing, we can make these design changes and therefore it's still okay.
Yeah. Assumptions like that really could put you at risk.
Yeah. And you noted on it as well too, right? If you're getting complaints back from the field, if you're having issues with the product when it's being in use, same thing, that comes back from hospitals and clinics, same thing that you see on the home use side. If there is consumer feedback, if you're hearing reports, if you're getting devices sent back, right, for those reasons, if water is getting inside, electronics aren't working, whatever it might be, right, you can use this kind of at any time to, address those performance aspects and take care of that.
Yeah, and it's a relatively fast type of testing too. Yeah. So the ask for redoing IP testing or feeling the need to do redo IP testing is really easy to achieve.
Yeah, fast, and it's really fun, as you said, right? To watch it and see what the products can withstand and how they perform is always exciting to watch. And of course, if someone wants to come in when they're doing the IP testing, they can be there and see how it's done. And we're certainly happy to have anybody participate in part of the testing process. So, is there anything that we missed, Sam, during this discussion? So many great points on IP testing and why it is so critical and important for medical devices.
IP might seem like a really small detail, but for medical devices, it's really the difference between a reliable life-saving device and a potentially costly failure.
Yes.
So by understanding IP ratings and choosing that right level of protection, and of course, integrating testing into a product life cycle, I mean, you can really make sure that you have a device that's built to last, no matter
absolutely.
the environment. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like there's no small requirement with medical devices, right? Everything really does just building blocks on top of each other to make sure these devices are safe and reliable. So, well, it was so great to have you on here. Really appreciate you joining us today. If anyone has any questions, of course, you can reach out to me directly. I'm happy to connect you with Samantha. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you next time.
Awesome. Thank you.